Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. I am Adele Tan. I'm a senior curator here at the National Gallery, and I will be your host and moderator for today's session. And welcome to the second part of Two Planets, which is a program within October Gathering. As you might already know, October Gathering was devised by the gallery's curatorial team to chart the burgeoning issues and challenges in the field of Southeast Asian art. Part festival and part conference, October Gathering is a space for us to dream, address, and expand critical themes and provocations in a multitude of ways. I apologize, my glasses are fogging up. Two Planets borrows its title from Thai artist Araya Ratchadamrungsuk's 2008 video installation of the same name that crosses the two disparate worlds of European art history and Thai rural life. I have used it as a structuring device, putting together a pair of artistic academic couples who are enacting the different partnerships in more ways than one. Two Planets also refers to the urge to bridge the divided domains of practice and knowledge, and Two Planets is meant to reinvigorate conversations on the enduring but neglected relationships between the literary, by this I mean poetry, fiction, theater, and the visual arts. This program is also wanting to redress the institutional absence of love, desire, and sex, abiding earthy tropes that have hitherto remained unsurfaced or less examined in discourse. But we want to be critical, but also convivial. Yesterday, you heard from Bangkok-based academics Pasuk Pongpachit and Chris Baker, who are with us today, who took us on a whirlwind journey through several hundred years of gender and sexuality in poetry, painting, and protest in Thailand. Today, we have our Singapore artist couple, Zarina Muhammad and Tini Aliman, who will be utilizing the more playful format of a performance lecture for their session titled Love Loves Difficult Things. 12 points on a cosmographic map of love and grief. Their lecture performance draws and unfolds from fragments from each of their auto-ethnographic aspects of their respective practices. The performance is presented as part visual conversation, part pragmatic prayer, part eulogy, part temporal installation that traverses the hiding places of love, grief, and queer spirits. The soundscapes of trees as conduits, the inventories of intimacies, the necessary spaces of silence, and the ways love loves difficult things. And to introduce our artists for today's session, Zarina Muhammad is an artist, educator, and researcher whose practice is deeply entwined with a critical re-examination of oral histories, ethnographic literature, and other historiographic accounts about Southeast Asia. Working at the intersections of performance, installation, text and sound, moving image, and participatory practice, she's interested in the broader context of ecocultural and ecological histories, myth-making, haunted historiographies, water cosmologies, and chthonic realms. Tini Aliman is a sound artist and designer, field recordist, and audio engineer who works at the intersection of theater and film, sound design, live sound, art performance, installation, and collaborative practices. Her research interests include, but are not limited to, forest networks, spatial acoustics, biomusic, botanical histories, and the variables of data translations via biodata sonification. Well, that's a lot of terms and nouns to draw from, but I think you will see them all entwined in this or in today's performance, hopefully. And just to also say that at the end of the performance, we will also have a Q&A, a summary discussion between the two sets of couples at the end. So please, when you have ideas or questions that come up during the performance, please retain them and ask them during the Q&A. Thank you very much. And I'll hand the floor over to Zarina and Tini.
Thank you so much, Adele. Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for spending your Sunday afternoon with us. Okay, so I'll just jump right straight into this. So this is one of our prized possessions from our home, Chongka, a popular game of logic played throughout Asia, Africa, and the Americas, go by many names. Variations and versions of the game are said to exist from the 7th century, with archaeological evidence found in Egypt and Jordan. It's said that there are more than 200 names for this game. Chongkat in Brunei, Malaysia, and Singapore, Chongkla in Indonesia, Sungka in Philippines, Makom in Thailand, O An Kwan in Vietnam, Mancala in North Africa, and so on. Slow down, right? I speak too fast. I'm over-caffeinated a lot of the times. Oh. Give us a moment, the sound. Is the sound okay? Maybe I'm not. Yeah. I need to sit on the metal plate like a chicken. Yes. Does it work? No. See, our circuit's not connected yet. Okay. So something that I love and have been preoccupied with is learning, mapping, understanding the context of the different names of the same object. Creaturely, otherworldly beings, elements, non-human animals. So really thinking about the symbolism, the ancestral wisdoms attributed to their form, purpose, embodiment, their etymological significance, the shape-shifting beliefs and understanding of what they might mean, what energies and embodiments they might hold. Something like what feminist and environmental scholar Stacey Aliman calls transcorporeality, the material exchanges across human bodies, animal bodies, and the wider material world. So the rules of this game is quite simple. 2 players share a wooden board. The 2 rows of 7 holes are designated as houses, while the last 2 larger holes serve as storehouses, although there are variations. Seeds, cowrie shells, or marbles are placed in each hole, and the objective is to gain as many seeds in one's storehouse as possible. So again, the etymology of the names of this game it can differ. In some cultures, I think it derives from the term mental calculation, and in other cultures, it kind of refers to the idea of moving, for something to move. So when we were invited to respond to this program, 2 Planets, Tini and I spoke about the respective ways about making kin, making home.
Marilah Encik, marilah Tuan.
It's working. Okay. Okay. Where was I? Okay, so we spoke about various ways, co-creating, co-parenting, what all these things mean to us. Basically, the different realms that we habitually occupy as individuals. So Donna Haraway writes, "To be in love means to be worldly, to be in connection with significant otherness and signifying others, on many scales, in layers of locals and globals, in ramifying webs." We argued, discussed, and unpacked what this means for each of us, and could finally agree on one point, that love loves difficult things. Ken? No? Good. Okay. So Tini and I have lived together for nearly 6 years now. We have cats, how predictable. We started with 2, and that's never enough, and 3 more moved in the last couple of years. We met at a friend's performance art event. I'm not sure if they are here, they might be, and decided it might be a good idea 3 days later to discuss, I don't know, creative interest, something, right? And then since that point, we have worked together on various projects in different capacities. We work from our home studio that we call Rumah Rimau Dapo. I think some of you might be quite familiar with that place.
Marilah Encik.
A place that's actually drawn. Okay, yay. Okay. A name that's actually drawn from Walter Skeet's 1899 Malay Magic. Bahasa Hantu, which is in the appendix, or translated to language of the spirits, are words that are used specifically and solely by a Bomo Pawang ritual specialist person. So in this list, he writes that the word for cat in Bahasa Hantu is Rimau Dapo, kitchen tiger. So rumah rumah dapur basically simply translates to house of the kitchen tiger. So another prized possession from our home is this beautiful tikar here that you see, that we're sitting on. This is a gift from our very wonderful friend, our dear friend Ilan, whose work is actually downstairs. You can see her very large-scale tikar downstairs. Whose personhood, art practice, and spirited energy is certainly a nourishing, energizing, and activating force that's much needed in this world. So this hand-woven tikar, which she created in collaboration with Kak Bunga from Pulau Bukit Tatagan, is named Bengko. If you understand Malay, Bengko, okay? A name which sometimes points to the non-linear, sometimes curvilinear, crooked, sinuous, not straight, labyrinthine paths that we might take. How? Go on. Okay. I remember the moment when we first laid out the tikar in our garden. Under the night sky, sat within its space, traced our fingers on the patterns, and laughed about how much we resonated with this way of traveling and being.
Uraikan rambut kau yang panjang lampir. Getirlah angin sejarum, dua jarum. Sejarum menampung kapal. Berat-berat dagangan membawa seorang. Ke sini berulang makan, ke sana berulang mandi. Marilah encik, marilah tuan, uraikan rambut kau yang panjang lampir.
So in Taming the Wind of Desire, Psychology, Medicine, and Aesthetics in Malay Shamanistic Performance, the anthropologist Carol Lederman describes in detail the concept of angin, which she calls the inner winds. She writes, "The inner winds, as understood by East Coast Malays, are close to Western concepts of temperament, both in the medieval sense of the four temperaments and as artistic temperament. Everyone is born with angin, the traits, talents, and desires representing our ancestors' heritage. But some have more or stronger angin than the common run. If they're able to express their angin, they can lead untroubled and productive lives, and in fact, will usually be respected for their strong, gifted characters. If they cannot, their angin is trapped inside them, where it accumulates and produces sakit berangin, or sickness due to blockage of the inner winds." So I've been thinking a lot about this for many years now. And I mean, it's been said, and I mean, those of us who are Malay, right, will grow up with just, the angin is the root cause of all disease or illness. So it is said that those with a more creative, restless disposition will have angin that can be described as the force of a hurricane, as opposed to a gentle breeze. How do we temper these inner winds in creative and intimate partnerships? How do we hold space for each other when the winds are not in our favor? As the saying goes, even when the trees want to be quiet, the wind does not stop. Angin, a portrait gestures to counter this ease, the cumulative biographies of objects, the act of gift exchange, and the inheritance of embodied knowledge passed down through generations of non-conforming communities have been a recurring theme in my work. I hold close to me this quite painful urgent point raised by Samoan Persian Cantonese artist researcher Liuli Estragi on the need to trace the sexual and spiritual genealogies that resist the Gregorian shame time introduced by European colonizers that keeps indigenous gendered people in a backward, whiteward trajectory to annihilation. So in 2019, I presented this work. This is a part of a much larger installation. This work titled Talismans for Peculiar Habitats. After I had experienced and survived several health crises, was grappling with re-evaluating support systems, constructs of family, and the traditions that mark the transitions to the afterlife. I performed the piece Domesticating Doubt about the Afterlife, Death Rituals and the Queer Body in the Museum of Contemporary Art, Taipei, with a translator by my side, for an audience who did not necessarily speak the same language as I did, or share immediate familiarity to some of the culturally specific aspects in the work. For this work, I thought a lot about Audre Lorde's volume of essays, A Burst of Light, which details her struggle with cancer. She writes, "I want to live the rest of my life, however long or short, with as much sweetness as I can decently manage, loving all the people I love and doing as much as I can of the work I still have to do. I'm going to write fire until it comes out of my ears, my eyes, my nose holes, everywhere, until it's every breath I breathe. I'm going to go out like a fucking meteor." So I've often described my practice and way of thinking, approaching the world, working like a multi-headed hydra, mostly because I enjoy the polyphony of multiple interpretations, the inevitable vexations and risks of translations, the mistranslations, sometimes even the impossibility of translations in some spheres, especially when working collaboratively across different modes, elements, mediums, with human and non-human co-authors. To date, that performance at MOCA has been one of the most meaningful for me. The energy of Lorde's words translated seamlessly in that room. My Taiwanese audience held such a generous space, and we shared expanded understandings of death rituals, belonging, separation, and the questions of what happens to spirits estranged from their ancestors. So in these strange times that we find ourselves in, where many paths resist linearity, straightness, may we find access and routes to the forms of care, wisdom, and safety that we need.
There are many ways we can define plant consciousness. There are associations with New Age philosophy, worldviews, science, and pseudoscience. In the context of contemporary art music making, to me, this binary can be blurred. While I do think that art today is fundamentally tied to the creator and their values or belief systems, the strict categories of art being manifested of anthropocentrism to humanize objects or living beings is blurred in the many multidisciplinary artworks we see today. I decided to let go of all fixations and methods and let the movement of the musical imagery flow and progress with more emotions, meaning, and mostly instinctual intuitions. In a study by Tel Aviv University, they found that plants begin to emit ultrasonic sounds between 20 and 100 kilohertz, which they believe could convey their distress and to other plants and organisms within the immediate vicinity. As our human ears can hear up to 20 kilohertz, we anthropomorphize the high-frequency sound from these plants and associate it with pain. Plant response to touch is called thigmomorphogenesis, which is permanent change in the structure of a plant in response to mechanical simulation. As plants cannot escape their environment, being rooted, it responds by retarding its growth and making a thick trunk in order to protect itself. Escape is not an option, so they adapt biologically. Do we choose to stay at the first sign of pain, or do we flee? While plants can respond to mechanical simulation, they do not come with a frontal cortex. And it's our frontal cortex which defines, which mediates emotional status. Pain and suffering can be subjective. We know the definition of pain, the definition of suffering, which necessitates some type of emotional status. Suffering comes with a negative emotional status together with the mechanical simulation, with nociceptors, with a frontal cortex that processes complex thinking of emotional conditions that process suffering. So I tried working with dead trees. Again, to some, death and dying can be subjective. These remains of what appears to be lifeless trees have bore witness to multiple changes. Changes in temperature, light, evolutionary adaptive traits, resistance to pestilence, chemical defenses, and other ecological changes through their approximate age. They have also witnessed the extractive hand of urban capitalism and land acquisition. Seeing the remains of these dormant tree bodies as potentially embodying an archive of environmental soundscapes. While it is impossible to bring a dead tree back to life, I intend to explore ways of engaging with other sensory modalities connected with these tree stumps. What does it mean to try to listen to an organism that appear on first sight to not be fully flourishing and in bloom? How can these tree stumps present meaningful frames for deep listening and perhaps embody its own acoustical site-specific signature? Plant memory. Plants live in a rich sensory environment. Grandma Willow in Pocahontas remembers the history of the people who sat under them or slept in their shade. We found that plants have the ability to retain past events, to remember them, and to recall this information at a later period for their developmental network. A process called photoperiodism helps a plant know what is the length of day and when is the right time of the season in order to flower. Mechanically manipulated nature can be created by turning lights on and off during the course of a day or night. Our memory uses the same exact three processes: encoding, storage, and retrieval. We have another type of memory which is called motor memory, which is used a lot by musicians or motorcar drivers. This could be likened to thigmomorphogenesis, a permanent change in the structure of a plant in response to mechanical simulation. Touch a plant many times each day and it will eventually go into growth retardation as a form of defense mechanism. What is our defense mechanism? In times of grief, do we suppress or process our emotions?
So lately I've been thinking a lot about varying modes of wayfinding, polysensoriality, and navigating through different environmental knowledges and wisdoms while thinking about the names of places, creatures, ghosts, and gods that cease to exist in our immediate memory. I think those of you who know me might have heard me ask many times, can ghosts and gods die? Is their survival dependent on the fervent frequency in which we say their names, make images of them? I'm interested in the ways that we can be attentive to these cumulative nature of stories and knowledge systems connected to place histories and the creaturely, sometimes elusive, unseen bodies inhabiting these sites. And I'm not just talking about hantula, right? I'm talking about the scarab beetles, the sandflies, the mud lobsters, the dragonflies, all sorts of microfauna, the very queer marine creatures, intertidal stuff, right, beings, one of whom would be the acorn worm, who I've been quite enamored with. And you can find lots of them on Cyrene Reef. So they're a sand-eating, detritus-feeding marine worm. And it's said that they are our closest invertebrate kin, whom we share 70% of our genome with. and whose gill slits have lent themselves in shaping the human pharynx. They thrive in mucus-lined burrows and find safety under rocks and shells, allowing the landbound to only see, in the few short hours of the low tide, their sand-shitting proboscis. Any space we occupy will inevitably be a site brimming with layers and layers of histories, bearing imprints of violence, legacies of trauma, survival, and also thriving life across human, non-human, and more than human worlds. Traversing these multiplicity and layers of spaces reminds us of the allegory of the flock of birds in Fariduddin Atta's Conference of the Birds. The birds cross 7 valleys, namely the valley of the quest or yearning, the valley of love, the valley of understanding, the valley of detachment, the valley of unity, the valley of bewilderment, and finally, the valley of death or nothingness. In their quests where they fly over realms of light and shadow, possessing great self-determination in learning how to die, be renewed, and embrace nothingness, I see some parallels with other kinds of migratory patterns that occurs for many human and non-human animals. The ways that we traverse across and within intimate partnerships, creative and intimate partnerships, and other webs of kinship. Our practice so far has largely been concerned with reflecting on these entry points from which we can talk with and listen to the ways knowledge, wisdoms are produced, transmitted, consumed, perpetuated, handed down orally, visually conjured, represented, documented, decontextualized, stolen, subject to gatekeeping, or held with love, gentleness, and renewal. Much of the process underpinning our work is led by being attentive and attuning oneself to space by instinct, intuition, and chance. And I've said this many times that I feel that it is extremely important to extend gratitude to and acknowledge all the non-human creaturely companion species, guides and guardians of spirit paths as co-authors who offer lessons and whom we are learning together to circumnavigate, accommodate, and redraw new thresholds in these often quiet entanglements. So how does the concept of one's place in space create a relatedness of beings, and how do they in turn write these cosmographic maps?
Whole area to make it an enclosed basis so that they can give even more dogs for the thing. It's just that they couldn't get that idea off the ground. Then you see below this scaffold reflection, this wooded track little bounded to the old Pulau Hantu.
Oh, yes, Pulau Hantu also, that's it.
Yeah. That as in the near shore Pulau Hantu,
correct.
Not the offshore
Not the one at near Pulau Senang.
All your maps marked quite clearly.
Yeah.
So right now it's occupied by the, see that little ground right is by that castle, yacht club. So I need to check the most of the islands.
So you see the hideous building. Yeah,
There's
that's
this
the little
one,
channel
this one on the left of the castle, this is the Bukit Cermin.
That's Bukit Cermin.
Then the...
Wait, there's one yeah, so that's
yeah,
actually in the distance. The entrance, you see that waterway between
Laya Creek, yeah. Then
and then Salvador. So there's a gap. That's the entrance.
Has that always been called like Tanjung Belaya or what? But is there like an accident?
That's the fake Tanjung Belaya. And then we should also get this
side and then the longkang.
Shall we get this one first because it's easier?
Yes.
Get this one first. This one. Yeah.
Where that boy is. The old maps also, you check the old maps you have on the wall, they will not see this like Pulau Ring.
The wandering glider wanders without any hope of rest. In fact, that's what its name means, to wander without any hope of rest. They cross transoceanic distances so vast, rarely stopping, preferring moist winds, flying without any hope of return. In spite of their ability to look backwards, they will not look back towards where they set off. They rely on descendants who inherit tricks and deep memoryscapes on navigation to continue crossing earth, land, sky, and sea to complete the migratory cycle.
The same species who have acclimatized to the heat and humidity in Singapore do not pursue this migratory impulse. They hover and wander, but only within the parameters of the island, perhaps still without any hope of rest. They are described as early colonizers of newly cleared land, gliding over temporal water pools formed in uneven patches of ground, looking for surfaces of water for their ovipositors to land. Surviving in these urban environments sometimes means gliding over lost habitats and mistaking the reflection of the metallic sheen of machines as water.
Not all species cross vast distances or are willing to adjust their temperament to the makeshift seepages of the city. Some bask at the edge of forests, thrive in shaded boggy wetland patches, moving, crossing, only within the proximities of their brackish water habitats, or slow-flowing bodies. They have names like shadow dancer, sapphire flutterer, red-tailed sprite, marsh wisp, clear wing gem, green metal wing, cryptic shade sprite, arrow emperor, banded hooktail, Malayan spine tail, spoon-tailed dust hawker, water monarch, white-tipped demon, mountain tiger tail, Singapore shadow damsel.
Odonids are one of many creatures that are known as messengers in between worlds. They are led by their light-sensing compound vision. Their names are not bound to a singular origin, myth, or etymology, or identification. They are simultaneously harbingers of life, rainfall, fortune, mischief, and destruction. They are cold-blooded. They have been called the devil's darning needle, the toothed one, and are described as beneficial predators. When they are at risk of overheating, they turn their bodies, tails skywards, into obelisks. Their embodiment and presence are intertwined with witchcraft, the spirits of rice plants, ancestors returning home, apotropaic magic, wish fulfillment, evidence of a thriving ecosystem in human-modified environments.
How do we keep track of distances, directions, and names taken? What trails do our bodies leave when moving across water? What messages from in-between worlds do we heed? What instruments, portable objects, and articles of safety are carried on these journeys? The cardinal direction of south embodies solar energies, heat, physical strength, the presence of warm but softer winds. How do these multi-radial tangents of local scientific, ecological, cosmological, embodied wisdoms accompany us on these crossings? What cognitive maps and compass-bearing abilities do we possess? And what are you inclined to do when the winds are not in your favor?
The song Selasi Ku Sayang, made popular by Ahmad Jais and Rafi Abuang, tells a story of the separation of lovers. As one lover leaves for their journey, the one that was left behind was tasked to tend to a selassie plant or basil until their return. The song is a conversation between these two lovers through caring for the plant. I planted the selassie, I planted at the corner of our garden, ruminating my love, oh my love, the one I left behind. I water the selassie, I water at the corner of our garden, remembering my love, oh my love, a symbol of our love. Oh my beloved, the love that I yearn, always on my mind. May it never wither until the end of time. Oh my beloved, the love that I hold dear, don't you worry, I shall wait for your return with hopes for you to be by my side always. How do we communicate or leave messages for our loved one who isn't there, especially the one who may never return?
So there are some of you in this room who have been acquainted or know very well our cat Buddy. Buddy was, I first met Buddy in 2012 at a, actually thank you to Michelle of Mud Rock Ceramics who's right there, because you organized a Save the Dragon Kiln event that happened to be, also have a Singapore, like a Cat Welfare Association adoption drive. So, so there's a very, cute white putu piring orange polka dot cat that was just in the middle of that space, and there were all these children poking him. So I remember just charging towards the cage. There was a huge bellow that came out of me, and then the children dispersed, and I was like, "Hello, hello, little friend." So long story short, I mean, a few months later, he moved in with me, and he's been such an important part of my life. I feel like he has literally, like, he and his sister Cleo, whom you all know well, right? We often call her the guest relations officer of our home because she's very friendly. So the two of them, I mean, I've often said that they have literally saved my life at many points. I mean, actually, even literally where there was a point I fell down because I mopped the floor, forgot, slipped, and then these two are the ones that sort of like, needed and made sure that I didn't pass out. So thank you, kitty cats, right? And Buddy, I mean, Buddy got his name because he was on the adoption circuit for 2 years, and and no one adopted him. But he was at the point working in the cat foster home as a companion to new cats that were coming in. And because basically he was a friend to all cat, all human, he was extremely friendly, very sweet, very gentle disposition. Buddy passed away this year on June 30th. He had a stroke, and he passed away in our arms.
I think of you every second, every minute, and every day. I miss you, Buddy. Till we meet again.
Sampai jumpa lagi.
So just bear with us a little while while we transition the placements to the Q&A. Okay, thank you so much, Zarina, Tini. That was stupendous. And I have to say that perhaps this is my first time that I've actually shed tears at my own event. I was just simply, I guess, touched in a way. But it's perhaps also relevant because I think your performance have also brought your friends, fans, loved ones out in force, and I really feel the love. I think you were also drawing energies from the room, right? Yes.
Yeah, we were.
So actually, from yesterday to today, I guess my opening question will try to suture the two sessions together. And I wanted to also think about the relationship, I guess, between the universal and the particular. Because the erotics, you know, love and desire and sex, aspects that are so shared and primordial, but they also whittle down into the very specific local cultures, and they disseminate it quite differently. But at the baseline, both of you guys use stories a lot. So I wanted to ask if stories can be seen as erotic guides that could serve as lubricants for social change. I think this is in some ways hinted at. And I guess because we are in an art gallery or a museum, I also wanted to ask if we could reflect maybe a little bit on how can a museum be a place for erotics, if not erotics, or a place for strong emotions. I don't know how many times have you guys been to museums and you literally break down or just shed a tear. Or erupt in joy, right? If you're in front of a work that moves you so much. And in relation to that, what would an erotic education via art look like? I'm also kind of drawing sustenance from Audre Lorde, whom you've also referenced, you know, a very powerful essay called The Uses of the Erotic, where she also talks about the erotic being the bridge between the spiritual and the political. Yeah, so just wanted to invite reflections on that from all of you. Anyone want to go first?
I think just the question of if I had ever cried in a museum. I did cry at the Ever Present exhibition, the last gallery. I was very emotional. I came back like 5 or 6 times. The first time was the most emotional for me in the Resistance and Colonization, the final gallery. Yeah, so that was just something that I thought about since it's quite recent.
Chris and Pasuk?
I can't remember having cried or felt in a museum and in the presence of an installation or a piece of a work of art in that way. But I think I can remember having carried away from the experience of experiencing a museum, a work of art, for it to affect me a lot later through the usual processes of memory, when you connect one experience with another. And what your question made me think about is that very often, museum spaces tend to be quite cold, don't they? They tend to be, sharp corners and square rooms and empty spaces and quiet, which are not so conducive to me at least, to an immediate emotional reaction. And I think quite often having to overcome a feeling of being rather passive in the presence of an artwork in a museum. However, there are, when I think back of that, and having said that, I can then think of a handful of times when I have felt much warmer and much more inspired, and if you also pressurized by works of art, but they're quite rare.
But because you guys traffic in storytelling, I just wanted to ask if that measure of having the narrative come back into places where we encounter visual art, does that actually help? Because I think many times we, go into our galleries and look at paintings, but we're not unable to decipher some form of deeper narrative history, which I think, your lecture yesterday with the wall murals and the temples kind of also pointed to.
Well, I want to say something. Actually, I have never feel emotional in a museum. But actually yesterday, when I was looking at some of the paintings from Indonesia and the Philippines about the feeling of the people who felt oppressed by the colonial masters during the independence movement, it actually moved me a lot. And especially, I was looking at what happened to the Indonesian in the paintings with Pramochya book, Earth of Mankind. That book really affected me a lot when I read it the first time many, many years ago, and it came back to me yesterday when I was looking at some of these paintings, and I thought that these paintings that were chosen to show me, it touched my heart and make me feel very strongly about how the people at that time felt that they wanted to fight against the yoke on themselves, and how the colonial master were kind of oppressing them, So, yeah, to answer your question, this museum has moved me, actually, yesterday.
I'm glad we did.
I was very, I was saying to Chris, this is a fantastic museum. And for Singapore, I must say, I often compare Singapore to Thailand. And when I came to live here for 2 years, actually, with Chris, and I didn't feel very much. I didn't feel. I found it difficult to get along here at that time, because. Sorry to talk a little bit about it, because I look very Chinese, yet I don't speak any Chinese, and many people came to me and wanted to talk to Chinese to me, and I could not understand, and I think they felt offended that that I perhaps have forgotten my own language and so on. Anyway, I didn't enjoy being here that much at the time. But coming back, and I felt that there's a lot more warmth in Thailand, where I came from, compared to the way people here treating one another at the time. It was a very tight situation of a mix of people who don't seem to sort of understand one another. I don't know how to explain. It's 30 years ago, of course. But this time when I came, I sort of felt that Singapore has gone beyond Thailand in being able to create this museum, to allow us who live in the same region to experience a different kind of feeling that people from different parts of the region express in the paintings and the sculpture. Of course, you said you haven't got enough from Thailand, and we haven't seen enough on Thailand. You have to find a little bit more. Anyway, so that's my answer to you.
Well, it's a good sign that we maybe in Singapore are learning to live a little bit more erotically nowadays than 30 years ago. But on that note of language, actually, interestingly, both couples brought into play the act of translation or translating or mistranslations. Yes, I wondered maybe if you wanted to share a little bit more about how you took on this activity and what richness it brought to your understanding of, you know, creating these narratives, yeah, of love and grief in Zarina and Tini's case, but also in the act of academic translation of these classical Thai poems.
Yeah, I mean, I think for our work, where we are attempting to work with acts of translation with plants or, you know, all these non-human animals or otherworldly narrative stories, beings, I mean, there's always that sort of need to check your own blind spots. There's always that need to also recognize that there are limitations of how much these concepts or these ideas can be translated into words, especially English. I mean, something that I often think about is the translatability of some of these concepts or these ways of being across different Southeast Asian languages. Because I think English is a very functional, utilitarian language. You know, yes, it has its poetry, but I do think that in our own respective languages that we speak, that's not Anglophone, there's a lot that can't be translated. And I think, you know, when we spoke about angin, or even plant communication, consciousness, I mean, so much. I mean, the idea of like angin as being able, you can temper angin through through music, dance, theater, through, you know, like physical, cathartic movement. Something Adele said, maybe you should just, dance at the end of this session. And, you know, I think that also defies like language-based translation, which I think is something that we are very interested in, recognizing the limitations of our humanness. Yeah.
Yes, so when it comes to translation, I learned that it's not just about how a human mind can comprehend. Like, I try not to decide for the non-human, collaborators that we work with. I do not decide how they should.
You mean your cats?
Cats, plants, sea creatures, whatever. When I record them, I do not try to comprehend a language. I do not try to comprehend an emotion or a message that they are trying to convey to everybody, myself, or just to each other. It is just, translating them into an idea of just deep listening and our way of communicating. Yeah.
Although sometimes, I mean, I think the question of, because we brought one of the books was, do animals grieve? And I mean, of course, we can never truly know, but I think based on our own observations of our cats, when we brought Buddy's body home, I mean, it was clear that the other four knew how to greet him and recognize that he's in the ether and he's no longer in his earthly form. Like, it was very, very evident to us. And we also spoke to an animal communicator, but that's another conversation.
Chris and Pasuk?
I guess I agree totally about language and particularly about English. Having, you know, I spend a lot of my time translating from Thai into English, and Thai is a rather soft and very fluid language. So the poetry that's written in the language is very plastic, you know. And English is a very stilted and very sort of stiff and full of all these hard consonants and very strict, quite strict rules about. So I'm conscious of trying to find ways to sort of bend the language in order to make it work better in reflecting the poetry you're trying to work from. And I recently got into a rather amazing internet email conversation with a gentleman in the US who simply just contacted us and had somehow got hold of some of the translation. And he was, if you like, a metrical nut. He was totally obsessed by metrical conventions in poetry, and he'd read what we were writing. And I write most of it in, you know, it's a sort of bent version of Shakespearean blank verse, You know.
Bingo.
Yeah, and he was saying, no, that line is wrong, and this line is right, and this bit is okay, but you could probably just put another syllable on the end, you know. And he was a complete nut on just having to be get it correctly precise and following the rules.
Pedantic.
Very pedantic. But also, what it made me think of in response was that the way that English has managed to become an international language by admitting all kinds of dialects. So we can, I will speak in relatively correct English, but I can sit and listen to a Ghanaian talking pidgin, and I know what he means, and it doesn't matter. So sometimes in translation, I then try and bend the language in that way. We make up a lot of words, and and switch words, so like use verbs as adverbs and tenses and this sort of stuff. But this is a big difficulty with translating into English. But I would also like to say that in watching and listening, particularly to the performance just now, I loved the sound. I thought your use of the sound going with what you were telling us was absolutely lovely. So just that.
Thank you.
Well, I say the same. I think language. I always feel that language can convey certain things, but a Japanese has said to us after reading our Kunchang and Kunpan book, where a lot of poems describe flowers and the smell and the shape and in the poems, the lady was saying goodbye to all her beautiful flowers because she's parting from them for a long time and she didn't know when she's coming back. And of course, when we read it in Thai, I can smell when the word is said, I can smell this flower, I can see the color and smell the other flower, and I can feel the touch of it and everything. And the Japanese who read our translation, it's not to say that you did not translate it well, but he wanted to have that smell too. And he wanted to have the touch that she has touched them. And he said to me, can't you do something? I was thinking that perhaps we could rely on the scientists to reproduce those smells and put it at the back of the book. And when you read about this part, then you can open to the back and smell it or have some touch. I was thinking about that. That's the limitation of the language, of course. And that's when I listened to both of you today, I sort of felt that this is a very enjoyable presentation instead of just listening to the both of us. Just telling words all the time. And with the sound of you, with your lovely manner and talking about yourself and the possession you have, and we can see it, exactly. Actually, if you want to smell, you can probably come and smell too. And then the wind. I felt, however, that I'm very interested in animals as well, and particularly birds. And you were talking about some bird?
Dragonfly.
Dragonfly. Oh, I thought you were talking about some birds in the ocean. And I didn't quite get that. I'd like to see it. And perhaps next time you can have some video at the back with even butterflies, even better, right? Yeah. Thank you. It was lovely.
Actually, on that note, since we're talking about flowers, I also wanted to ask if you both might, or you four might be able to share. I think what is definitely there, the relationship between nature and sex, because, you know, obviously in the Thai literature, a lot of the erotic scenes are or conveyed via metaphors that have rich allusions to nature. And whether, you know, we can revivify the ways we look at, say, the botanics within our pictorial depictions, or even the microfauna, because we are here very used to valorizing the apex predators, the big mammals. So we have the tiger, the lions, but you go right down to the smallest organisms as well. And I think Tini also brought up being non-anthropocentric, right? And whether this also opens up a new way of looking and interpreting our visual production.
So actually on our little card, the two batik pieces that you see there, one has a motif of the dragonfly, and the other one is what we like to believe, or like what we would like to see as the tutup bumi, which is a kind of weed. Tutup bumi, which translates to cover the world, which literally is cover the world, because if you boil it in a certain way, it is used as a contraception for women. And yeah, I mean, there was
Solomon's seal.
Solomon's seal as well. So I think something that we've been really interested in are the different names for these plants, and it's considered a weed. I mean, I think most of us would not even think about it if we see it. It's just this little cluster of, like, it's almost like petal-like. Just Google tutup bumi, Solomon's seed, tapak gajah. You know, it's along the same family of weeds. But again, it has all of these properties that are, you know, great for women. And I mean, I think this is, just something that we have been talking about as well, these different healing and killing plants. I mean, if you make a list of the 100 most healing plants, a lot of it will overlap, obviously, with the 100 most, like, the plants that can kill you as well. So just thinking also about the nature of these organisms. And just one more thing about the dragonfly. I mean, I don't know if there are any dragonfly nerds here, but you know, when they're mating, they make a really corny heart shape. Yes, they turn their body upwards, and they do make a heart. So again, is that our humanness projecting? Yeah.
And only the tail.
Only the tail, yeah.
So the female brings the tail up and then make into a heart shape, and then the male still just...
Yeah. And the particular one that we mentioned, the wandering glider, the Singapore version is very interesting. I don't know if you all caught the thing that we were reading, because usually they travel great distances, but the ones, we were told by a dragonfly expert in Singapore, the ones in Singapore unfortunately just decided to not do these long distance travels because they're so comfortable in our air-conditioned nation. They just kind of hover and stay within the parameters of the island, which I think is sad, funny, I don't know, it's tragic comedy at its, you know, finest.
Not too comfortable and lazy to make love.
Right.
I think maybe that's what it is.
It's very Singaporean lah.
So we also learned from our intertidal walks that these sea creatures, they are intersex. They're queer. They do not have just one gender. So as we do our many walks, and then our friends, and then we see clusters of them, like, you know, hanging out together during the low tides, and our friend will just say that, hey, that's sexy time. I said, how do you tell? So we just squat there for like a good 10 minutes and just observe, and like, no, not sexy, but to us, it's not sexy, but maybe to them it was. So.
Chris and Pasuk?
Well, I not in Thailand, in Thai literature. I don't see it so much in Thai literature as in other literature. Maybe in English.
If you go back to the early stuff, and if you think particularly of the bit I read yesterday, which is this extended set of metaphors about flowers, which are very much obvious, this man's way of relaying, in a very elegant way, his sexual experience with his woman, and it's very nicely done. But if you also think there's been a kind of progression in the poetry from there towards the present, where it became more formal over time. So I think in the more modern works, it's very difficult to find something which has been so straightforward and explicit in the use of floral imagery. When you get to the stuff in the 18th and 19th century, it's very wonderful at using certain flowers and their names and certain animals and their names to set the atmosphere in which a sexy scene is then described. But they've been sort of separated. They've become the background. And then when you get to the later 19th century and onwards, it's become very formalized. In fact, that what the poets do is they have bits where they show off their ability to play with rhyme and sound using the names of plants and animals and birds and trees and so on. But it's become
more like a show-off.
It's a show-off. It's actually lost a lot of its, original erotic content, which is quite interesting. I hadn't thought of it.
Yes. Thank you all so much for sharing. We have about 5 minutes left, and I just want to open the floor to questions, if you have any, for the speakers here today. Oh, no. Not yet erotically charged up for questions, I see.
Need more flowers. I have some more in the back.
Yeah, I think
some for you later.
Maybe they all need some aphrodisiacs from you guys. Yeah. So, well, if there are no further questions, maybe we would like to give everyone a huge round of applause and thank them for their contributions. Yeah. For some reason, I got given a tolak angin for me to, I guess, push out my wind. But I guess angin also means rumors, right? Yes. So I'm here to disseminate new narratives, new rumors, new, I don't know, whatever. Yeah. So please continue to enjoy the rest of October gatherings, and may the winds be with you. Thank you.
Thank you.